Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 124. Hand me my shovel. I'm going in. Shota had been gone for over an hour now, and Hizashi was doing his best not to panic. They were going to do right by this kid. Someone was going to do right by this kid. He just had to have faith in them. The safety of his students was always at the forefront of Nedzu's mind, and he may not know Tsukashi all that well, but he had protected Ivy in the past. They would do right by him. He was unloading the dishwasher when he heard it. A pained scream came from the office, followed by a loud thump, and Hizashi had never moved so fast in his life. He was at the door and flinging it open in seconds. Midori was sitting on the far side of the room with the blankets half wrapped around him and half still on the bed. He was breathing heavily, and he flinched when Hizashi came in, but it didn't take him long to tune back into his surroundings. Sorry, he stuttered. Oh, a nightmare. It was probably just a nightmare. That was, well, it was better than a corporeal threat. It's all right, kiddo. Sorry for barging in. I just thought you were hurt. You're okay, though, right? He asked to verify. He had fallen off the bed. Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry. He apologized again as he detangled himself from the bedding and got to his feet. Hizashi studied him as he threw the blankets back onto the bed and immediately went about making it. He was shaking. Show's going to be home soon, and it's almost dinner time. Is there anything you'd like? What? Midoriya asked, eyes darting around the room looking for a clock. It was around 6:45 last I checked, Hizashi offered. The kid had been asleep for over 10 hours. He clearly needed it. If he had been running on the same schedule as Shota and not taking naps during off periods, he couldn't imagine that he had a very healthy sleep schedule. Sorry, I didn't mean to sleep so long. He apologized again as he frantically smoothed out the sheets. All right, less than 1 minute awake and had already apologized 3 times. Great. It's fine, kiddo. You needed it. But you need to eat too. Any requests? He asked again. No, I don't. Whatever is fine. Thank you. He replied quickly. Hizashi watched him as he fluffed up the pillows and straightened them out until the ancient pull-out couch looked like it came straight out of a furniture catalog. That was probably going to be something to look out for. Obsessive tidying, feeling the need to erase evidence of his presence anywhere he went. They wanted to tell him he didn't need to do that, but now wasn't the time. All right, I'm going to get started cooking then. I'll let you know when it's ready. Let me know if you need anything. They dismissed, shutting the door quietly behind themselves. They were starting to see the toll that being around this kid had caused Shota over the past few years. They felt like they were never going to stop worrying about him until the day they died. Doing their best to shake their anxieties off, they turned on some music at a low volume and started making dinner. Karaage sounded nice. A good comfort food, easy to get down. They were nearly done making it when Shota walked through the door around 7:30, looking equal parts exhausted and relieved. His eyelids were drooping, but he had a smile on his face, and Hizashi had to curb his enthusiasm. They're on board? He whisper-shouted excitedly, taking heed of the kid just one shut door away. Yeah, he laughed as he spoke in grateful disbelief. They put the tongs they were holding down and bounded over to him like an overexcited child, damn near tackle-hugging both of them to the ground. They felt Shota's laugh vibrate against his chest more than he heard it, and they were smiling so wide it almost hurt their face. They grabbed Sho by the shoulders, held him out at arm's length, and shook him forcibly while they demanded to hear everything that had happened. Can I take my shoes off first? He asked with a smirk still on his face. No! They shot back immediately, but let go of him regardless. It didn't take much convincing, thankfully. Nedzu is going to make sure everything that can be scrubbed from the record is scrubbed from the record. Tsukashi is going to get Ivy's case shut somehow, though we don't know how yet, and I'm going to be the lead on Midoriya's case so that nothing connecting him to Ivy is ever put into writing, Shota explained as he pulled off his boots. They let out a long, relieved sigh and sat down on the step leading to the Genkan for about half a second before springing to their feet again. Ah, I'm going to burn the chicken, they explained as they ran back into the kitchen. They could hear Shota laughing at them as he followed behind him. Smells good, he said, peeking over their shoulder to look into the pan. Thanks. You want to set some plates out and put the spare pot holder down so I can just bring the whole tray to the table? It's pretty much done. Shota just hummed in response and did as requested. He was a little more withdrawn than he had been just a second ago, and they knew that meant that they had gotten the good news first. So, what's the bad news? They asked as he returned to the kitchen. Nothing awful. We're going to have to take him into the station tonight and report me finding him properly, except we're going to say that I found him tonight. Otherwise, I'm getting a kidnapping charge on my record. Tsukashi said it's going to be a long night. We're going to need to get a social worker on the case, and you're probably going to have to come in before they approve us taking him home. He trailed off for a moment, but they could tell he wasn't done, so they waited patiently. If they approve us taking him home. Oh, Sho, don't say that. We're taking him home, even if that means getting a proper kidnapping charge, they joked, hoping to get the smile back on Shota's face. He just rolled his eyes and sighed. They turned back to the pan and flipped the chicken again, making sure that nothing stayed on the bottom for too long. After a minute or two, they looked back at him. He was leaning his back against the counter and chewing at the inside of his lip the way he did when he was nervous. Did Tsukashi make it seem like that was a real possibility? Him not being able to come home with us, I mean? He asked. No, well, yes, it is a possibility, but he seemed optimistic. Said that everyone was going to want to go home and we'd probably get the go-ahead for at least the night, Shota answered. But long term, we didn't get that far. Izuku heard the front door open. That meant that Eraser was back. Where had he gone? What had they been doing while he slept? Mike had told him that he didn't need to worry about anything until later, and it was feeling pretty damn later now. Mike had said they were getting started on dinner about 45 minutes ago. It was probably almost done. He should have gone out and helped. He'd been kicking himself for the last 45 minutes for not helping, but every time he went to move, it felt like his limbs were glued in place. He certainly wasn't going out there now that Eraser was back. Wherever he was probably had to do with Izuku, and he'd made him go out and do things, and he was just now getting back. How long had he been gone? Frick, he needed to help. He needed to do something. They gave him a bed and let him use their shower, and now they were making dinner for him, and he hadn't done anything in return except disrupt their days and make them do more work. A knock at the door pulled him out of his thoughts. Dinner's ready. He heard Eraser call through the door. Froze. You said he's awake, right? He heard Eraser's muffled voice call back toward the kitchen. He was supposed to respond. He needed to say something. He needed to go out there. A knock sounded out against the door again. Midoriya, can I come in? Jeez, Izuku, just respond. What the hell is your problem? When Shota opened the door, Midoriya was standing on the far side of the bed, facing the door, with his hands held up like he was halfway through the motions of grabbing something. Except there was nothing within his arm's reach, and he wasn't moving a muscle. You all right, kid? He asked gently, doing his best to hide his concern. Like he had unpaused the video, the kid's arm swiftly returned to his sides, and he dipped his head forward in a bow, much too steep to be reasonable. Yes, fine. Sorry, I'm fine, he stuttered out. A blush was high on his cheeks, and he looked down to his feet quickly. That was strange. Dinner's ready. Zashi made karagi. You've had it before, he prompted. He looked pale, and his hands were shaking. Whether that was due to the fact that they hadn't gotten the chance to feed him before he slept for like 10 hours, or because he was scared, Shota didn't know. You're shaking, kid. When did you last eat? He asked. I, I. He trailed off and stood there thinking for longer than Shota would have liked. Well, if you have to think that hard about it, then the answer is too long ago. Sit down in the chair there. I'll bring your food in here, he instructed. He still didn't know whether the shakes were nerves or low blood sugar. He figured it was probably both. Getting some food in him and not forcing him out of his current safe-ish space would likely help, regardless of the root cause of the issue. He left without giving the kid time to argue, though he doubted that he would. He had yet to defy a single command since the incident. With a heaping helping in hand, he went back to the guest room. I don't expect you to eat all of this, but it heats up fine, so don't worry about it. He assuaged before Midoriya got the chance to panic. He set the bowl of rice, damn near spilling over with chicken and a tall glass of water. I do want you to finish the water. You haven't had anything to drink besides a cup of tea since you got here. You're dehydrated. Yell if you need anything, he said again, not giving the kid time to argue before he took his leave. He and Hizashi ate their meal in relative silence, chatting infrequently, but nothing of substance. He didn't mind. Both of them had a lot to think about anyway. Shota took their dishes when they were done, since Hizashi had cooked. He rinsed them and set them in the dishwasher before returning to the dining table. Hizashi was sitting there, looking at the grain of the wooden tabletop and bouncing his leg as he thought. They needed to talk about several things, but now was not the time. Right now, they needed to update Midoriya on what all had happened at the meeting earlier and tell him what to expect going forward. He was contemplating whether it would be better to go to him or have him come to them for that discussion when the door opened and the kid walked out with his dishes and quickly scrambled to the kitchen. Zashi looked up at the noise and poised like he was about to talk, but Shota kicked him lightly under the table before he got the chance to insist that they would do the dishes. They looked at him annoyed, but he shot them a look that said, "Shut it." So they did. Cups go in the cabinet to the left of the stove. There's tinfoil in the drawer under that. You can put some over the top of the bowl if you didn't finish and stick it in the fridge. If you did finish, then bowls go in the same cabinet as the cups, he informed nonchalantly. He remembered how awkward Ivy had been about their plates at Chio's house, and he knew they hated feeling like a burden. If Midoriya wanted to do his dishes, then they would let him do his dishes. When he finished doing as he was told, he walked back over toward the guest room, but hesitantly stopped in front of the dining table. Whether he was waiting to be dismissed or to say something, Shota wasn't sure. After a moment of silence, he assumed it was the former. Take a seat, kid. We have some updates, Shota prompted, nodding his head toward the chair to his left. Midoriya sat down but didn't scoot his chair in, like he was leaving himself room to run away should the need arise. He did his best to ignore that for now. You're not going to be held culpable for anything, and you will stay enrolled in the hero course. You're going to be safe, Shota stressed before he started explaining anything. Midoriya's nervous expression didn't change much. Shota hadn't expected it to, but he had hoped it would. I met with Netsu and Tsukachi and told them the situation, he continued. Midoriya's minimal anxious fidgeting froze. They are completely on board. We are not going to let anything happen to you, Shota stressed again. Midoriya didn't calm down in the slightest. Words weren't going to settle his mind. He was sure the poor kid had heard empty promises before. He knew, quote, better than to believe an adult would protect him. That's okay. They'd just have to show him. Netsu and Tsukachi are going to scrub anything that might link Ivy to you from the record, and Tsukashi's going to get the case shut. I will be handling your case, and I will make sure you can't be linked to Ivy. The kid tensed even more at that. He had been hoping that having a game plan would appeal to his logical side enough to settle him, even just a little bit, but somehow it only seemed to make it worse. Anything he did or said only seemed to make things worse. He glanced over to Hizashi, but their face betrayed nothing. Surely they would say something if he was screwing this up royally, right? Regardless of his floundering, he still needed to explain to Midoriya what was going to happen, so he pushed on. We're going to need to go to the station later. We'll probably leave around 10:30, 10:45. We're going to tell Tsukashi that I found you tonight and immediately brought you there. Otherwise, technically, this would be considered kidnapping. He tried to give a subtle joking tone to that statement. Hizashi smirked and huffed out a breath through their nose, but Midoriya didn't react at all. We're going to have to give a statement for the record and get a case started so that a social worker can come in and officially approve you staying with us, he concluded, doing his best to keep any nervousness out of his tone. The kid was chewing his lip and refused to look up at either of them. He wished he knew what was going through his head right now so that he could assuage his concerns, but he had no idea. The best he could do was make a guess and hope it helped. Is there anywhere else you would rather stay? I can't guarantee anything, but we could try, he offered reluctantly. Like everything else he had tried, that only made the situation worse. Jeez, he was so hopeless at this crap. No, or I mean, this is fine unless you want. I don't. Whatever's the least trouble is fine, he replied shakily, wringing his hands with enough force to look painful. Easy with your hands, kiddo, Hizashi butted in. This isn't about whatever is the least trouble. It's about what makes you the most comfortable. That's what we want. Midoriya only started wringing his hands harder at that. His gaze lowered again and started darting rapidly between nothing and nowhere. His breaths were getting erratic. Of course, asking him to choose something for himself would set him off. Shota doubted he'd done something strictly for himself and no one else's benefit in years. He knew he wasn't going to like an intrusion into his personal space, but he looked liable to pop a finger out of place at the rate he was going, so Shota slowly reached out his hand and set it on top of Midoriya's tangled digits. He immediately pulled them apart like he'd been burned and shoved them under his thighs. Sorry, he apologized frantically. Hizashi made eye contact with him in a way that said they were extremely concerned about that response as well. It's all right, kiddo. We just don't want you to hurt your hands, Hizashi responded. Midoriya still had his eyes resolutely trained downward, and his legs twitched every once in a while, as if he was fighting himself, trying to keep them still. Why don't you stay with us for a little while at least? We can figure something else out later if we need to. Is that okay? Hizashi offered. That's fine. Whatever it is it's fine, he repeated. Shota fought the urge to sigh. That part was supposed to be the easy part. He shot a look toward Hizashi that said, "Tag, you're it," and they sent back a subtle nod. Kiddo, I know it's difficult for you to talk sometimes, but you're going to need to give a statement tonight. We thought it would be easier if Sho knew a little bit more about what was going on so he can speak up for you if it gets too difficult. Detective Tsukashi will be there, possibly a social worker as well, and I know an audience isn't going to make things easier. Is it all right if Sho asks you some questions now so he can help out later? Hizashi asked. Midoriya chewed at his lip, but nodded readily like he hadn't even stopped to think about what he actually wanted and just went with whatever Hizashi had asked. He could see Hizashi glance at him out of the corner of his eye, but he ignored it. They didn't need to alienate the kid anymore by speaking in micro-expressions right in front of him. Honestly, on second thought, Shota wouldn't doubt his ability to read their micro-expressions just as well as they could after knowing each other for 15 years. He was far too perceptive. I just want to get some things straightened out. You said you'd been on your own for about 3 or 4 years now. Do you remember approximately when the last time you saw your mother was? I got the eviction notice August 3rd, so a few months short of 4 years. But I hadn't seen I hadn't seen her for a while before that. I don't remember when, but she wasn't there for my birthday. I remember that. He stuttered out quietly. The last sentence sent a pang through his heart. He couldn't imagine a little, freshly 12-year-old boy waiting for his mom to come home on his birthday only to go to bed lonely. He pushed the gut-wrenching image aside and carried on. Which is when? July 15th, he answered reluctantly. That was coming up. Next month. He took a mental note of that. The only way this kid would be spending his birthday alone this year was over Shota's cold, dead body. All right. Did you stay with anyone else for any amount of time? Did anyone know about your situation? Friends, family, neighbors? No, he confirmed what Shota had already expected. This kid had been well and truly alone for 4 years. It would have been nigh on impossible to have a meaningful relationship with anybody without them not knowing about his living conditions. He hadn't even known Ivy's name, but he still knew about his living situation, or at least he had suspected. And your father has been out of the picture for a while now, correct? He was gone well before your mother was? Yes, I was 7 last I saw him. He peeped out, the words barely audible. That was unfortunate. The most they could pin on him would be failure to pay child support, which was, of course, under the assumption that he had, in fact, failed to pay child support. Midoriya looked about ready to combust, and he was going to have to do all this over again later. They shouldn't push him any more than they already had. All right, that should be enough to get this case started. If we can't get any more than that done tonight, don't worry about it. I know this is a lot. That's all we had to tell you. You can stay out here and watch some TV or go back to the guest room, whatever you'd prefer. Just be ready to leave around 10:30, he dismissed. Midoriya's gaze shot between the two of them rapidly as if he was trying to figure out what they wanted him to do before he stood up, quietly scooted his chair back into place, and darted back into the guest room. Shota waited a moment before resting his elbows on the table and rubbing his eyes with a sigh. Hizashi reached over and took his unoccupied hand in theirs, but they didn't say anything. Izuku immediately reported back to the trademark panic corner when Eraser let him go. Why were they doing this? They were all sticking their neck out for him. Why the hell would they do that? If he got caught by someone else, he'd be taking down 3 heroes and one of Mustafa's chief detectives. Why would they risk that? Well, he knew why Nezu and Tsukashi would risk that. They knew about One for All. They didn't really have a choice so long as Izuku held the power. Gosh, why did he do this? He knew he should have quit ages ago. He should have quit the second he decided to take One for All. Now everyone was gonna get screwed over, and it was all his fault for being so damn selfish and not killing Ivy when he had the chance. He was sitting between the two desks again and trying his best to physically pull himself back together. His breaths were tight spasms in his lungs, and he was either getting too much or not enough oxygen. He couldn't tell through the panic ripping through his mind. The dinner he'd just forced down felt like it was about to force its way back up. It was 8:19 when he had checked the time in the kitchen, so it was at least 8:30 now. He had 2 hours before they had to leave. He needed to pull himself together. He was already making this difficult enough for everyone. He huddled in on himself in the corner in an attempt to make himself as small as possible. He was taking up too much space and too much time. He was causing too much trouble. Everything had spiraled out of control, and his stupid freaking panicking was only making things worse. He forced his breaths to be as steady as he could manage. He was hoping that the air would fill his lungs more comfortably after a while, but he had been sitting there so long that he had lost track of time, and his chest still felt like it was being crushed in a vice grip. Tension refused to leave his shoulders, and he wondered when he'd ever be rid of it. He'd been either unconscious or in a state of fight or flight for nearly 24 hours at this point, and he didn't foresee it getting any better, at least not anytime soon. There was no promise of reprieve, and the thought made him want to crawl out of his skin. When things had gotten this bad before, he'd been able to escape himself as Ivy. He didn't have that anymore. He'd never have that again. A few tears escaped his eyes as he sat there like a man on death row, clawing his way through every last excruciating second with the sword of Damocles looming above him. He tried to find comfort in the certainty of knowing things would get worse, but it was flimsy at best. When Shota knocked on the door and entered the room, Midoriya was sitting in the same spot between their desks that he had been this morning. Hizashi had said that he'd slept all day, but he still looked so tired. He supposed having your whole life ripped out from under you would do that to a person. He was looking up at him. He was present, at least. About time to head out, he informed. The kid just nodded. He looked so uncomfortable, and Shota really didn't want to force him out of the space he was in and tear him away from whatever pitiful amount of comfort it was providing. But he didn't really have a choice. He'd had a blanket earlier. Maybe taking that would help? No, he wouldn't want to feel like a child with their blankie. He was sure the kid was already humiliated enough as is. It's kind of breezy out. I'll grab you a jacket. Being decked out in Sashi's merch is suspicious enough anyway. He offered, giving the kid an out and a logical reason to not refuse the gesture. Meet you in the living room. He dismissed himself to let Midoriya extract himself from the corner without an audience. The next few hours were going to be difficult. He wanted answers as much as he didn't. He knew he was going to uncover a lot of unpleasant details about the kid's life over the course of this case. He knew that just because he didn't know about them yet didn't mean that they didn't happen. It was going to be better for both of them in the long run for him to know all the nitty-gritty details. He'd be able to understand and help the kid more if he knew the events that had shaped him. But at the same time, what he didn't know wouldn't keep him up at night. Ignorance was bliss and all that. It was funny how much he had wished he had answers about Ivy and all of their mystery over the years, but now that those answers were finally being presented to him, it made him sick. He grabbed the coziest and most nondescript hoodie he owned and took a deep breath before walking back out into the living room. Things were going to get better. This was rock bottom. There was only one way to go from here. End of chapter.